Welcome to the Backstage Creative, the podcast that focuses on the people who work behind the scenes of theater. I am a musician and theater enthusiast. My name is Krista Copper. Today is my conversation with Chloe Treat. Chloe is a director and choreographer, and she's fantastic. I'm so grateful that you're here checking out this episode. I'm sure that you will get a lot out of this conversation because I know that I did. So here we go. Here's my conversation with Chloe Treat. I was looking on your website and I saw that you worked on Natasha Pierre and the Great Comet of 1812. I never saw the show, but I love the music for that show. Like, I'm slightly obsessed with just the weirdness of all those styles and how they fit together. So let's start with kind of the choreography side of your career, and let's start with what was your experience like working on that show and working with Rachel Chavkin and all of that.
That show is one that is the kind that comes along, I hope not once in a lifetime. I hope there get to be a few others as special as that one, but it was an incredibly, incredibly special show that I feel so lucky to have been a part of. I came onto that show as the associate choreographer. I was Sam Pinkleton, who is a brilliant choreographer and was nominated for a Tony for his work on that show's associate. And the thing that was really special about that show from a choreography standpoint is that it simultaneously had the energy of a big Broadway musical, which it was. There was this one of my favorite moments of choreography was this wild dance off that happens at the end of Balaga, and there are people doing high kicks, and it's very much like, you know, capital D dance. But because that show was made up of such unicorns, like not everybody in that cast by any stretch of the imagination was a Broadway dancer. There were people who were professional accordion players and people who came from the kind of downtown opera world, and then Josh Groban, and then, just so many different bodies inhabiting that space, that the challenge and really the joy of making movement for that show was being able to build things that felt simultaneously exciting and theatrical and dramatic, and that if you came and saw a Broadway show, you feel like you got to see that kind of high energy dance that you perhaps were going there for. But at the same time, there was this element of it that was just incredibly democratic and honored all of the different bodies that came together to tell that story, which did not have the same levels of training or endurance or flexibility or expertise. And because of that, it really was able to sit in where dance comes from, which is just humans moving, and there's no kind of pass fail bar. And that's something that I learned from that show in terms of one of my values about making movement that is definitely stuck with me. That's a little bit about the movement in that show and what made it so special. And the other thing, of course, being, in case this isn't obvious, that show was not on a stage. It was 360 degrees. It was all around you, and there were people in the house, in the mezzanine, and on the kind of traditional stage space, which had been reimagined as both an audience and playing space for our show. So, in terms of my job as associate choreographer, which was largely about tracking where bodies were in space, it was such an immense challenge, and so much harder than when you're kind of just on a traditional stage with a fourth wall, because there are people all around you, and figuring out how to document that and how to be able to record it so that it can be taught to new swings and understudies was very challenging and exciting.
So how does that work when you're an associate to someone? Are you kind of splitting the work 50-50? Like how do those roles differ?
I hesitate to answer this question because I think that the truth is it's likely quite different depending not only on any given member of a creative team, but then any given relationship. So I think it's highly unique and personal and case by case. But in that case, Sam and I had done many, many shows together by that point. So I think that there was a lot of trust there. And while the associate definitely is wearing uh, the hat of a lot of administrative tasks, so, making sure that all of the choreography is documented, coordinating with dance captains, or in our case, a team of dance captains, to make sure that everything is staying clean and that new swings know what they need to know, doing a bunch of work that is really quite, disciplined administrative work. That is one part of it, which is something that the choreographer does not do. So the reason that they have an associate is that they can be taking care of those kind of nitty gritty paperworky kinds of things. But then, yeah, there is also a lot of it which is generative and about making or noting or being an additional outside eye. One of the things that was especially exciting as an associate on that show was that in a traditional Broadway show, or really in a traditional show, the choreographer could sit in the house and watch the whole show and note it at once. But with Comet, that wasn't possible because there were so many different views of what was happening. So it's not like Sam on any given night of previews could sit in the house, see the whole picture, see what everyone was doing, and make decisions and changes based on that. And so one of the things that he really counted on his team for, which I was his associate, and then he also had an assistant, Flannery Gregg, who's an amazing dancer choreographer. And we would all sit in different spots in the house and essentially see a different show, and therefore be able to, it wouldn't take 4 shows to be able to note the whole thing. We could all kind of give input and talk about changes that need to be made based on what we saw that night.
Hmm. Yeah. What a cool experience.
It was an amazing, amazing experience. And that show is also, my husband is the music director of that show. We fell in love on that show.
Oh, love it.
Catherine is a queen. It's just like Comet is really, it's family for many, many reasons.
Oh, that's so great. So take us through your choreography process. When someone calls you up and says, "Hey, we want you to choreograph this show," where do you start and how do you get to the finished product?
It depends show by show, but I'm a director choreographer, and I'm really a director first. So whether I'm wearing both hats and or just being hired as a choreographer, the place that I always start is story. So I feel like in my mind, in a theatrical setting, choreography can really serve 2 different purposes. One is a storytelling purpose, and one is kind of decorative. I'm sure smarter brains than mine could tell you all other ways that choreography might serve in a show, but those are the kind of 2 ways that the 2 kind of macro ways that it breaks down for me. And I always really hope to be making choreography that is helping to support the story and to move the story forward. And so the first thing I need to understand as a choreographer is what is that story? What is the story we're trying to tell, and what role will movement play in telling it? And after I feel like I've come to understand that, there might be a specific style of movement or a specific time period or a specific feeling that I want that movement to evoke, and then I'll generally do a bunch of research about that, which usually looks quite unglamorous and takes the form of making a YouTube playlist or something like that, and just pulling a lot of different inspiration from things that exist in the world. And then after that, I really generally like to devise on the bodies that are going to be doing the movement. Most of the work that I have done has been on non-dancer bodies, and I really love making movement for people who don't consider themselves dancers. And so, I think when that is the case, bodies are always going to be able to decide for themselves what they do best better than I'm going to be able to decide what they do best. So at the beginning of a process, I like to have some kind of dance lab where I bring in the research that I've done and a bunch of prompts based on what I know I'm hoping to make. And then ideally, I always want to be able to work with the bodies that are eventually going to be moving to try to create the specific gestural language that's going to exist in the world. And I say that as a tool that I use for non-dancers, but honestly, it's also a tool that I use for incredible dancers because frankly, I'm not one. um, I'm a decent dancer, but if I have extraordinary movers, they're going to be able to do things way outside of my range. So it really works in both ends of the spectrum. I think if for me at least, if I'm choreographing only on my body, then to some extent I'm going to be limited to what my body can do in both directions. And so I always really like to be the person who's curating and editing and prompting the movements that are being made, but to get to work on a really wide range of different bodies.
Hmm. What are some of your choreography inspirations?
I love this musical called Seven Brides for Seven Brothers, and there's a barn dance sequence. It's a super fucked up, crazy musical. I want to direct it so badly. But there is a barn dance sequence that is like this extended, incredible dance off that I think is one of the best dance sequences in musical cinema. And that was my favorite movie as a child, and I think was really inspirational for me. I love Pina Bausch. I love taking inspiration from the more concert dance and modern dance world. I mean, Sam has been a huge inspiration to me in terms of thinking about, like I said before, I was never an incredible dancer, but I definitely I come from a trained dancer background. And I think I had, when I entered this field, I had some ideas about who was and was not a dancer. And I really credit Sam and also his company Dance Cartel and his co-artistic director Ani Taj in really reframing that for me, because frankly it's just way more exciting to watch all different kinds of bodies move. So those are three inspirations right off the bat.
Hmm. Is that pretty common for directors to also be in charge of another area of a show?
I'm sure there are more people who only direct or only choreograph, but certainly there is a vast tradition of people who do both. Susan Stroman is a huge one. I mean, there are actually tons, because it really is, especially in big dance musicals. You want the worlds to feel integrated. For me, in all elements of design, nothing is worse than when you kind of see where the homework assignment was divided. Sometimes you can go into a show and really see, like, well, this is the scene, and then it stops, and then the choreography starts, and that flat thing is the set, and this thing on it is the light. And there's some shows where you can really see the division of labor. And the kinds of shows and the kind of theater that I'm really interested in making, Comet being such a good example, is one that kind of feels 360 and feels like the different mediums that are doing the storytelling are all kind of bleeding into each other, because that's what theater really is at the end of the day. It's a mode of storytelling where there are actually 5 or 12 or however many different modes of storytelling working together at the same time. And I feel like you always want that, or I feel like the kind of theater that is most successful is when those different modes of storytelling are all operating really seamlessly, which is a long-winded way of saying to me, it really makes sense that somebody wears the hat of both director and choreographer, because it's just one additional step in kind of erasing those seams. Now, of course, you have really famous director choreographer pairings who have been working together for so long that they can kind of create that feeling of seamlessness together. And of course, that does exist. But I think the reason that the director choreographer title is one that has been successful and continues to be something that our industry has, is because it's another way of making sure that the story is being driven by one vision and is headed in the same direction. And of course, then the like con to that is sometimes more brains in the room is better. So there are definitely pros and cons, but it is a common practice, and I do think when done with humility and with collaborators and all the things that make theater great, it can be a really beautiful tool.
Sure. So take us through your background, where you're from, where you went to college, if you went to college, and how you got into theater, and basically, just how you got to where you are today.
Yeah, so I'm from San Antonio, Texas. I grew up as a dancer. I went to a performing arts high school for dance, but my grandfather was a theater person. He actually went to the actor studio in New York and had teachers like Sanford Meisner and Martha Graham, and he kind of came from this, you know, classic American mid-century theater tradition and just really, really loved the forms. So I definitely grew up with a respect and a love for the American theater, and really more than anything just grew up loving musicals. And I feel like I don't know, now musicals are so much more in the mainstream with all of the like with Glee and all of these things that are happening live, and it does feel like and you know the phenomenon of Hamilton. It does feel like musicals are perhaps more in the mainstream than they were in my childhood. Though I haven't done hard research about that. That's just a feeling. But I don't know, I loved musicals, and I don't have a super good reason other than I did. So toward the end of high school, I had had some injuries as a dancer, and I decided to audition for theater schools because it just felt like my dance career. I mean, I feel like I can't even say that because I never had a dance career, but I wasn't going to have a dance career. I didn't want to go to school for dance, and I just decided that I was going to audition for theater programs, which was frankly a pretty ill-informed and egotistical move because I didn't have much experience at all. But I got into Tisch and, pretty quickly learned that I did not want to be an actor, but was really lucky to have been placed in a studio called Playwrights Horizons Theater School, where you have to take directing and design and devising classes. And that really immediately felt like something that resonated with me. I also, in my first year, was lucky enough to have Rachel Chavkin as a directing teacher, which was the beginning of mentorship, and I assisted her. And so, kind of lots of good luck and good timing there. So yeah, then I ended up in theater school and was really focusing on directing. And, I didn't have a huge background of theater outside of loving it, but I had this dance background. And at the end of school, when I graduated, cosmically, coincidentally, the jobs that started coming my way were choreography jobs because people were like, well, you have directing experience and you have dance experience. And the Venn diagram of those things means that you probably have choreography experience. And, I had definitely choreographed things before, but that's not how I had thought of myself. But there is, if dance is the kind of in the body technical knowledge, and directing is the ability to step back and look at the big picture and see how things need to move around to get where they need to go, there was a way in which those two skill sets came together to form the choreography skill set. So I started having a lot of choreography jobs. I was introduced to Sam. I assisted and was his associate on many, many shows, something like 13 different shows. And then, the rest of the trajectory, which is still very much playing out. It's what I always tell any young directors who ask me how to get started, is like, I think you just, everyone's path and everyone's ladder is so, so different that I really don't believe you can tell someone what to do. But I met people and I worked for them, and through those experiences I met other people and I worked for them. And yeah, now that's a decade of working in theater in New York.
Yeah, it's one of the fun things I've enjoyed about this podcast is hearing everyone's story because everyone just comes from such different backgrounds and we all took different paths to get into the theater world. And like it's amazing how wide open, the way to be a professional in this career is.
For sure. I think it's so important to highlight and, of course, I think it's really important to acknowledge privilege and different people have different levels of access and
Mhm.
like whether or not you have to have a survival job and whether or not your parents are producers. There are like all of these things that really change people's paths, of course. But that said, I don't know two people who have done it anywhere near the same way. And I'm very hesitant to ever be prescriptive about what the path is because it just, I think the one common denominator that is true for most people is it's a really small industry and it's based on connections. And yeah, everybody will end up figuring that out in different ways.
Mhm. Why do you think you were drawn to directing?
Well, my parents and my family would laugh at me and say it's because I came out bossy and just have always been doing this. I have I have three younger siblings, and truly, from the time that I was able to direct them, did. Growing up in Texas, we had a pickup truck, and I would put on lots of shows in the back of the pickup truck. And I would also do things like there's a kind of infamous Easter pageant that I directed, which, like, we weren't even religious. I'm not quite sure where I got this idea, but I made my sister be Jesus and then crucified her. Um, which was one of my earlier directorial debuts. So I don't know that the urge to like organize people and tell them what to do has always been there. Not that that is by any means the main part of directing, but it is certainly one of the aspects that is there.
Mhm.
Um, but I think I love interpretation. I love, my favorite kind of directing is reimagining revivals and classics. And there's something about, I think for some people, being in theater, being a director, being an actor, what they really love is getting to tell a story that's never been told before. And for me, the thing that has always felt really thrilling is to get to handle things that are perhaps dated or problematic or stale or something like that, and through the directorial lens get to breathe new life into them and get to gift an audience with a new understanding of an old story. I'm a big, how do I even say this, student and lover of kind of mythology and archetypes and how stories shape the human experience. And I really believe that the kind of stories that we put into the world shape the world around us. And, for example, as a woman thinking about how women have been represented in stories throughout time, I think the really limited archetypes that were available to us have meant limited imaginings of what our lives and our trajectories could look like. And so, kind of outside of my work as a director, one of the things I care about deeply is thinking about patterns in storytelling and how we can break them and how we can kind of shift things we think we know on their heads. And so I think for that reason, there's something about the directorial art, especially as it has to do with revivals, that really itches that and is exciting because it's about, sometimes there's, for me, more power in taking something that has traditionally been limited or problematic or one dimensional and shining a light from a different side of it. So that's what really gets me going in the morning.
Mhm. Does that have anything is that similar to what it says on your website about democratizing storytelling? Is that kind of what you're talking about?
Yeah, I mean, I that is part of it. The democratizing storytelling. I really believe that storytelling is one of the things that makes us human. I think that it's something that everyone can do. I can even go down a like nerdy science path, which maybe I will. I'll take a moment and go down a nerdy science path. There is a line of thought that the thing that makes us human and and the reason that we are different than all of our other animal sisters and brothers is our ability to tell and believe in stories. And that historically, those stories have been things like money or nation or religion. And that the reason that humans were able to gather in larger and larger groups was because we were able to kind of hold space for these collectively imagined things.
Hmm.
So I like to think of storytelling as our human superpower. And I think if that is true, and if it is one of the reasons that we have evolved into the species that we have evolved into, then it's something that everyone can do. And, I think that historically there have been so many obstacles or kind of like bars that had to be passed to decide who was and was not a storyteller. And one of the things that I really want to push against as I make work is that idea. And um, I want to hear stories and make stories with people who don't have BFAs or degrees or prestigious residencies, because I at least know that my mom is just as much of a storyteller as I am, and so is I don't. So are all of our human brothers and sisters, and that's one of the values that I really try to bring into the room as a director.
Mm-hmm. I like that. As a director, you have so much power and sway over like the atmosphere in the room, and the type of environment that creates the rehearsal space. How do you create the right working condition that you're after?
It's so dependent on the kind of project you're doing. The thing that I kind of work on the most, and where my heart really is 30-person musicals, and that's a very different room than a 5-person play, which is a very different room than a group of 10 ensemble members who are devising work about trauma. And I have done all of those shows I have done, and and they require really different rules to be set in the room for that room to be functional. So I think, first and foremost, there has to just kind of be a reckoning of what is this room, what are the needs of this room, and what kind of space do we have to create in order to all feel safe and supported. I think in that 5-person play, you really want everyone to have a voice, and you want to talk through every beat, and you want to feel that there is kind of collective authorship or authority in the room. On a musical with 30 people, that would create disaster, and you would never get anything done. So different rooms call for different things. Obviously I think you can respect people and treat them with kindness regardless, but different rooms realistically call for different things. That said, the thing that I will do in any room that I create is just make sure that I have done as much work as I possibly can. And I think that for me, at least as a leader, that's the thing that I hold myself to, that is kind of my core value, is if I'm asking you to respect me and listen to me and trust me to guide a room in a process, then I have to be the most prepared person in that room. The position of leadership is one that has so much responsibility, but my responsibility to my company is to put in at least as much work as I am asking for my company members to put in. No matter what the room is, and no matter what the kind of quality of the energy of the room is, depending on what the project we're working on might be, I always want my company to feel like they have a leader who knows what's going on, who has done their homework, who is looking down the road 3 steps ahead of where they are, so they can really trust and be in the moment and know that they are supported.
Hmm. I would imagine that there's a lot of times you're dealing with a huge amount of personalities, big personalities, the like. How do you navigate between working with the design team and working with actors and with the music director? How do you kind of navigate through all of these personalities?
um, it's hard. I mean, I think that this is why people over time really find their crew that they love. First time collaborations are so hard in part because you are learning someone else's, they're like relationships, and just how in relationships maybe two people have two different love languages or are trying to say the same thing but are using different words, and it takes time to realize that, first time collaborations are always going to have such a learning curve. So I think, one of the first things I will say to that is I've spent the last 10 years, and I'm very much still in the process of finding my team, finding the collaborators who I feel like share similar values as me, challenge me, support me. We speak a similar language. We have a common goal. When we say good, it means the same thing. So that is one step of it. And then in terms of when that is not the case, or how you build up to those relationships, I don't know, you just have to you just have to kind of trial and error it. And this is where I do have a lot of feelings about what it is to be female in this industry, because
Mm.
I think there is a way in which I was socialized very much in a Southern female tradition, which means things like I was told to be a lady a lot, and I was told, like, if someone does something rude to you, you kill them with kindness. That's
Hmm.
how you show that you're upset. You're just overly very, very nice to them. So that is maybe one specific extreme, but I do think that for women, and especially for young women in this field, there is a probably unintentional but still present expectation for politeness. And I've definitely had encounters, usually with older men, where me just being direct was perceived as and scolded for being rude. So yeah, it has to be trial and error. I always hope that I can come in very prepared and then just speak to people directly and professionally, and be respected for that. And that isn't always the case, and you have to wiggle around and figure out what works with different people. But one thing that I will say that I think is so important is having a big community that you can lean on for when those moments of conflict happen, which they just inevitably will. Collaboration is hard, and conflict does not mean you're failing, it's just a part of it. But having a big network of people who you trust and rely on, and can say, okay, is this my bad? Do I need to apologize? Is this something this person is doing? Who should I talk to? How should I approach this? And I have a network of other creative humans who I really respect and trust and feel I can be vulnerable with when those inevitable moments of conflict do arise. I've really relied on them to help give me advice, provide support, and also be the people who say, this has happened to me too, just so you don't feel insane, because sometimes you can feel a little insane.
Yeah. I love that you brought up women in leadership, and I think that's such a big topic nowadays. And I have a lot of feelings and a lot of thoughts and a lot of experiences about it, as I'm sure anyone who's been in this career for more tthan a year has experienced. I don't know, how do we fix this? How do we make it more fair, more equal? What do we do?
Yeah, I mean, so I guess there are two. I try to think of it in two parts, and I'm not sure that I'm succeeding terribly at either of them. But we just have to like articulate things and then try.
Hmm.
Um, when I think about how my gender in a position of leadership exists in the world, there's the part that I have control over, and there's the part that I don't. So there are people who, whether or not they have articulated this in their brain, or it's just deeply subconscious, so having been socialized in a way that this is what they believe, really dislike women in positions of authority. They won't be able to articulate why. They won't be able to even articulate that that is what's happening, but that is what's happening. um, and I don't have control over that. I have
Mm.
control over mentoring young women, creating diverse spaces, which of course means so much more than just gender, but that happens to be what we're talking about right now. I have the ability to create inclusive spaces moving forward. Those things are in my control, and that's what we should be doing. I think in terms of the like grumpy old TD, I'm thinking of one very specific person. I know, hello world of TDs, you're not all like this. Please, I really, really know that. But I think in terms of that person who you do feel is being unprofessional because on some very base level they are disgruntled about your authority. How I'm trying to frame it for myself, sometimes more successfully than others, is that is not the person. I should not spend my energy trying to change that person's mind, because often they won't even concede to the fact that that is how they feel in the first place. What
Mhm.
I can do is try to work on myself about not being hurt about it. And like, please, please don't get me wrong. I get hurt about it. I come home and have a good cry. I like it is not by any means like this does not affect me. But the thing that I am trying to work on with the support of a community, with seeing a therapist, with like all the good, mental health things we can try to do is to try to recognize when it is something you have control over and when it isn't. And in the instances when it isn't, to not take it so personally. I don't know if this is an experience for other women, but I know that for me, I think part of my socialization was being incredibly incredibly attuned to other people's feelings at all times, and if I feel like I have hurt someone in some way, fixing it, like always apologizing, always being willing to fix it, always wanting to make it better. That's exhausting. And there are just going to be some people for whom you can't make it better. And trying to not let that be a parasite on your energy and your worth is where I'm trying to put my energy.
Yeah, there are times when I get all disgruntled about it and I get, mad and this isn't right, this isn't fair, and it's not. But at some point, you just have to get back to work. Like,
Totally.
it's so easy to get bitter. But I mean, at some point, that's not going to help your work and that's not going to help you be a role model for other people who are coming up behind you. So, at some point, you just have to say, well, this is how it is right now. Let's get back to work.
Totally. And, I don't want to, I think if there are people, this is not to dismiss abusive behavior. I think if there are people inside of institutions who are doing harm, we shouldn't look the other way and get back to work. And
Yeah.
there are, hopefully in some situations there are steps that can be taken, etc. But I mean, for me, like the situation of if I'm in a room with someone who I mean, sometimes it's as simple as who I can tell doesn't like me. I talk to my dear husband, who's been socialized male, and he also is Israeli, which I am not, but he describes to me as a culture where there's just far more acceptance of kind of being like, yeah, they don't like me, so what? I am so envious of that in him, and I'm really trying to learn, not to tolerate abuse, not to look the other way if someone is doing harm inside of an institution. But if someone doesn't like me, to be like, they cannot like me, even if I suspect that that reason is based in some level of sexism or discomfort with my authority, just being like, that's their deal over there.
Yeah, I've I've worked a lot with young kids, and there's so many times where I have to tell them to worry about themselves, and sometimes I have to tell myself that, like, just worry about yourself.
For sure, for sure. It's really hard. I mean, I like to think that it's also a good quality that I notice and care how other people in a room are feeling. I know that
Mhm.
is a good quality. But there is an extreme to that quality that at a certain point is just not helpful, and it's not everybody's job to like you, and it's not your job to make yourself likable to everyone.
Mhm. Yeah. So I found out about you from the Playbills list of 50 women to watch. So that's awesome. Congratulations for making that list.
Thank you. That was I had no idea, and it was a very It was a complete surprise, and it was very lovely and made lovelier by the fact that so many dear friends are on that list.
So why, if I can ask you to kind of toot your own horn a little bit, why do you think that you were on that list?
Um, I mean, I'm really good at my job. It's one of the things that I felt looking down that list, and I feel so often, especially about women in this field. You know, we are asked to prove ourselves for so much longer, and our resume has to be so much deeper before people are ready to take a chance on us. I think I'm on that list because I'm a really good director. I'm really good at directing specifically musicals. I'm good at big rooms. I'm good at reimagining stories in a fresh way. And yeah, I don't know. I think that's a list of people who, at the end of the day, are really good at their jobs,
Mhm.
and have worked really hard for that to be true.
Yeah, I saw that list. Someone like reposted on Facebook, and I was like, "Yes, thank you, thank you for that list." One of the excuses are, well, we don't know the women who do these jobs, or who are good enough quality in order to handle like a Broadway show or whatnot. And then they published this nice little list.
Yes, it's certainly true, and I just know more stories than I can count, and I'm sure you do too. And at a certain point, they become boring of men who are kind of moved to the front of the line or given opportunities with so much less. There's just good faith there, you know, in a way that there
Hmm.
really has to be proof and evidence to take a risk on women. And fuck that shit.
Agreed.
Fuck that shit. But like the flip side of it is, I feel really grateful and continue to feel grateful to know that I'm very qualified, you know, and to have gotten to really work and exercise my tools over and over and over again.
So my final question that I like to ask everyone, and you had given some advice earlier, but advice for young directors who are excited and want to be on Broadway someday. What advice would you give young directors?
Oh, well, see, this is where I'm terrible because my advice is always that I can't give you any advice because I just think it's so different for everyone. Um, but I my part of my advice would genuinely be not to listen to anyone who says they can give you advice. I think anyone who tells you this is the way and these are the steps you need to take is full of shit, and you can all you need to do is look at the resume of anyone working to see that there is not one path. And so then I think the thing that we all have to do, and God knows I am in a continued state of going through this process, is continually recommitting to what the why is for you.
Hmm.
Why do you want to do this thing? Because this industry is a marathon, and you can have success that is short lived. It can take forever to reach success. There's so many different ways that it can play out. If you're not really connected to why you want to do this, it's hard. So I guess that's one part. And then the other part is get really good at your job. You know, I've been in rooms where people aren't ready for that position of leadership, and they point the finger, or they're unkind because of it, or they place blame, or all these kinds of things. Like, hold yourself responsible and get really fucking good at your job and do it over and over again. And when things don't go well, figure out why they didn't and be better next time, and do your homework. Yeah, that kind of stuff. So be good at it, and know why you want to do it.
The music for the Backstage Creative was improvised and performed by Ian Leroy, and the logo was designed by Zach Rimbold.